early, right? So I should
Yes.
say good evening. You look so fresh, Gandy.
Oh, thank you. You too. You do too.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's start now. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
Waalaikumsalam.
In our webinar series, this is the last session of our event. The seven virtual guest lecturing. Together with us, Gandy, Griselda, Quijano, Zavala, PhD. She is going to discuss about language learning evaluation, review of evaluation concept. Before we pay attention to the keynote speaker, I'm going to read her biodata. Gandy Griselda Quijano Zavala holds a PhD in Applied Linguistics from the University of Southampton. And then she finished master degree also in Applied Linguistics from Ohio University, USA. In a Fulbright scholar. And a bachelor degree in English as a foreign language from the Universidad Autónoma del Carmen. She has worked as an English and Spanish teacher. Currently, she works at the Universidad Autónoma del Carmen as a professor researcher. She teaches courses focused on ELT methodology and research content courses for future English teachers and translators as well. Her area research focuses on language classroom practice, motivation, among other topics. Also, she tries to involve students into different language practice outside the classroom. A couple of years ago, she organized a virtual intercultural exchange with students from Mexico, Indonesia, and Turkey to foster intercultural communication. Also, she organizes projects where students teach English in their community. It means public schools. In her free time, she enjoys spending time with her family and pets. That's great, Candy. And also, I'm going to say thank you for all participants who joined this webinar, hopefully until the session finishes. All right, now we invite Dr. Gandy. Time is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction again. It's my pleasure to be with you one more time here. So today we're going to continue with talking with some concepts about evaluation of learning. Okay, so just give me a second to share my screen. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's continue with our topic today, that is evaluation of learning. We're going to be doing an activity about what we discussed the previous lesson. Okay, but first we're going to do a review in case there are any questions. And then, well, depending on your decision, we may have a break or we can just go on like the previous session. And then we're going to have a couple of more activities for today. So the previous session, right, we discussed what was evaluation. You provided some important terms for the concept, right? Some of those words were based on assessment, judgment. It also had to do with affective factors, all right? And so that's very important when we discuss about teaching. It would be impossible to talk about teaching if we don't cover or if we don't think about evaluation. Why? Because there are many reasons to evaluate. And one of those main reasons is to know whether the students are having any type of progress. And because our job as teachers is basically to help students, right, to develop the language skills, specifically talking about second language learning. Yes. Okay. So we made this difference, right, in concepts about testing and assessment. Both testing and assessment are forms of evaluation. Yes, so forms of measuring skills, knowledge, and some other aspects, right? Depending on the area that we discuss, whether it's at school, at work, etc. So, but we also covered the differences between testing and assessment and how some authors basically believe that testing is used as an all in the old paradigm. That doesn't mean that tests are old and that they are not useful. But what I mean here is that in traditional education, when students were evaluated, it was the tool that was mostly used was the test, right? So as a teacher, I would teach, and then at the end of certain period of time, certain units, I would give a test to my students, right? So that's what it's covered by testing. In the most common examples here are the types of standardized tests. We mentioned some examples such as TOEFL, such as IELTS, right? That basically evaluate our language skills as international students. So, and we also discussed assessment and how it differs a little bit from testing in the sense about the use, right? Different types of tools that we can use in the classroom to evaluate our students. So while testing can be a more objective measure, and because it can be standardized, and a test can be given to different participants and a big number of participants, assessment refers to more subjective tools where the focus is more on identifying the learner needs, yes? But that does not mean that we cannot use assessment tools to assign a grade, yes? So that was basically what we covered the previous session about what is language learning, what is evaluation. These two concepts about evaluation and the differences between them, testing and assessment, yes? So I don't know if there's any questions so far before we move on to the activity.
All right, Gandy.
Okay.
In our secondary schools,
Mhm.
Assessment can be divided into two kind of tests. Test and non-test, Gandy. Non-test is assessing students, student affective. It means students' behavior, students' attitude, something like that. And test is assess students' cognitive and psychomotor competence.
Yes, definitely.
What do you
I
think
think
about
that,
it?
yeah, I think many schools, for example, in Mexico, it's a competency-based education, right? So based part of the competency-based education, as you mentioned, is this part of affective factors that is not only the knowledge, right? But it's also the attitude, as you mentioned, right? Because sometimes, and I'm pretty sure we have some experience about this. In my experience, I have had students that are very, very skillful with English skills. They're good. Their proficiency is fine, but somehow their attitude is not appropriate. They don't like to do teamwork. They don't like to share knowledge, skills, right? And somehow, if we want to become teachers, we know that we're going to be in front of students. So I do believe that that part of attitude is important. Although I think it might be difficult for us to evaluate somehow, right? And but how can we evaluate attitude here, for example, specifically the one you mentioned? If there is teamwork, and that's why it's important to have different types of evaluation, because if we always give tests, a test is an individual tool, right, that we use to measure knowledge, but it doesn't tell us whether this specific student is ready to work in a group. And teachers, we work in groups because we need to design programs, we need to design syllabi, we need to design tasks together, right? So it's very important that we promote collaborative work. And assessment specifically helps us to do this in the classroom. Yes?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, okay, so let's continue then. Okay, so let's do our activity. In the previous talk, I mentioned some types of evaluation, specifically assessment, right? Some of them were formative, and the other ones were summative. So we're going to do an activity here to see what kind of tools, assessment tools, you would use in some specific teaching and learning scenarios. I have prepared different types of scenarios for you. Okay, I'm going to share the link in the chat box. Give me a second. What is the chat box here? Okay. And let me know if you can see it. Can you see the link?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So let me explain to you what we would do here. Let me stop
scenarios.
This one here, and I'll try to share the other one. Where is it? Okay. Okay, so I see some people are already there. I see 3 people there. Okay, and let me try to share it. Okay, so we're here. I'll wait, and while people are having access to the link, okay. So as I mentioned before, okay, so I'm going to present different types of class scenarios for you, and you need to decide what you believe. There's no right or wrong answer, okay? You just need to decide what kind of evaluation tool you would use. Even if it was not mentioned the previous session, maybe an assessment tool that you have used before or that you have read about it and you would like to use, that is fine. It's just feel free to do that, okay? So let's go to the next slide, okay? So for example here, students have practiced the topic of daily routines. Obviously, with all of these learning and teaching scenarios, we're going to evaluate. And we want to know whether students are learning or not. So as teachers, right, all of us as teachers, we need to decide what kind of assessment, what kind of evaluation, right, we would use in this specific situation, okay? So I don't know if you're familiar with Jamboard, but what I want you to do here, if you can see here on the left side, there is there are some tools here. You can click on this, like Post-its. You click on it, okay? And this is a note. And let's say that you believe, okay, I'm going to use an example, okay? And write down your name because Jamboard doesn't specify. And I say Gandy, okay? And it's going to show up here. And then you just move it and drag it whatever you want, okay?
Okay.
You can move it. Yes, take your time. If you have any question, let me know if you need any help. If you would like to use more than one tool, it also feel free to share maybe more than one. Okay, so remember you can click here on the Post-it note. You click on it, you write. You can change colors if you want to. Okay, so let's say you mentioned presentation. All right, and you write down your name. Okay. So any ideas? In the previous session.
Well, everybody, please share your ideas, your opinion.
Yes, thank you.
Good Gandy quizzes.
And I know that you have also learned about some recent tools, right? Technology tools. So with Juan's session, so maybe you could say, I have never used it, but I would like to use it to test, right? To evaluate if my students are learning daily routines. I don't know, any ideas that you have. How would you evaluate your students?
Well, Mrs. Nadia, please share your experience of using Quizlet. Hello, Bu Nadia.
Ya, Ma'am.
Yeah, please you share your experience of using
Quizzes, Ma'am.
Hello English, or quizzes, or Quizlet. One.
You more experienced, Mom.
You just need to write it. Just click on it and write what there are more teaching scenarios, right? So this is just ideas. Okay, remember there's no right or wrong answer. It's just like a brainstorming of how we could evaluate certain topics, right? So remember, sometimes we decide that it's good to use a test depending on the purpose. Remember, the test can be graded or not, right? So in this specific topic of daily routines, what kind of evaluation would you use? Do you want me to repeat maybe what you have to do in case you're not familiar with this tool?
Gandy, I teach reading and as a daily routines, yeah. Students should read one sentence and then I can examine their pronunciation, reading aloud, and then I can examine the pronunciations, correct or incorrect, something like that. This is my daily routines.
Okay.
So I should check and recheck their pronunciations as a daily routines in my class, reading class.
Okay. All right. So yes, of course, the topic is broad, right? Daily routines, but in daily routines, there are many aspects that we need to decide, right, to evaluate. So whether it's grammar, whether it's vocabulary, whether it's pronunciation, right? So there are many aspects that we can cover here. Okay, so let's go to the second scenario. I hope that you get there, okay? Students have read a book of their choice to improve reading comprehension. So as a teacher, you ask students to choose their own book, right? So that, because you know that if they read continuously, they are very likely to improve their reading comprehension. How would you evaluate this part? How would you evaluate if they are actually having some progress on reading comprehension? Specifically because they have chosen their own book. When we assign a book, well, we can give them maybe quizzes, right? Because we know the book and we read it too and we prepare. But if they have chosen their own book to read, what kind of evaluation would you give?
Hello.
I specifically, they're very shy today. I think they didn't have breakfast. They haven't had breakfast, that's why. When we're hungry, we cannot think, right? So I'll help here. What I like to do with this, when I assign this to my students, I love to give them a reading journal.
Reading journal.
Yes. A reading journal. That's what I usually like to do. I don't like them to hand in the journal continuously, but I use it as a formative assessment, not as a summative assessment, because I believe that somehow if we start evaluating whether they do it or not, whether they are writing correctly or not, somehow they don't fall in love with the activity itself, that is reading. So what I usually do in this situation is that I assign the reading journal, yes, and I give some aspects that they need to follow in the journal, like just writing down a paragraph about what they have understood, right? That they mention some details like how many pages have they read, like a kind of diary, right? So if they can mention something simple like, today I only read 1 page. I found it interesting at first, but then I became bored. But I found this sentence interesting, and they write the sentence, right? I understood this part. Something simple, like maybe a paragraph, right? Maybe more. And in my experience, there are some students that write a lot, and there are other students that just write like little bit at first, but as time goes by, they keep writing and writing, right? And it also depends on whether they are enjoying the book or not. And sometimes that happens, right? It has happened to me, and I'm pretty sure it has happened to you. Sometimes we believe a book is going to be interesting, and then we start reading, and somehow it doesn't get our attention, right? So in that case, because that's what happens in normal life, sometimes students come and they say, oh, I don't like this book. I thought it was going to be interesting. So I say, it's okay. If you don't want to continue reading this book, go on and choose another one, because the point is that they enjoy reading, and they monitor themselves whether they are understanding, but at the same time they enjoy the activity. Okay, so where did the post-it go? I saw reading and now it's not here. It went away. Okay. So I think they share something, evaluation. Oh, it's this presentation, right? What you're sharing. Okay, yes. So is there any other evaluation tool? This is my suggestion, and this is what I like, right? But is there any other suggestion tool that you would like to use when you assign a book for your students to read? How do you think we can evaluate whether they are reading and comprehending what they read? Would you use any other tool?
Okay, can I say something, Gandy?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Is it okay if we ask them to summarize each chapter, for example? After summarizing, if we only ask them to read 1 chapter, yeah, okay, 1 chapter only. Ask them to summarize or ask them to retell the content of the book.
Yes, definitely. Right. So I will write it down. I will write it down. That's great idea. Okay, retelling. Okay. And because it doesn't have to be written, right? So they can write through a journal. Somehow they are summarizing, giving like the reflection of the reading task, but also commenting on the content of the journal. So something more specific, would be just to summarize. Okay, so read 1 chapter and write a summary of your understanding of the chapter, right? Another way to evaluate whether they are understanding what they read is, yes, retelling. So we can ask our students, maybe, because if everybody is reading a book, we can ask them to share with a classmate, share what you are reading. And then we monitor and we listen to what they're saying, right? And now that we are going online because of this pandemic, we can also ask them to present, right? To present, okay, what is the book that you are reading? And tell us about your book. When students present, you can actually see that their understanding, the use of new words, right? New expressions, because sometimes this is what we do when we learn something new. We learn a word and then we want to use it. So we take the opportunity, whether we are presenting, retelling the story, or writing a summary, or writing in a journal, and we use the word or phrase that we have just learned. So that's a very good way to evaluate, right? Of course, we would need to decide whether we give a grade to this or not. I don't like to assign grades when I assign books for reading, right? When it's like optional. I prefer doing this type of activity to encourage reading in the classroom and and outside the classroom, right? Intensive and extensive reading. But there are many different ways. So thank you. Let's go to the next scenario, okay? So you ask yourself if students are ready for the next English level course. What would you do to evaluate? So let's say that you are teaching a basic course or A1 course, all right? I don't know how many courses you teach in the program. How many English courses do you teach? In my university, in our program, there are 6 English level courses. There are 6. We have like, it's basic, pre-intermediate, intermediate, and then we have advanced. I think I missed one. But then we have 2, no, there are, yes, and then we have 2 more, which is TOEFL preparation test and IELTS preparation test, okay? So we have those 4 English courses, like general, and then we have 2 specific courses that prepares them a little bit for the TOEFL and the IELTS examination. So in order for them to move on, right, definitely they need to pass the course, right? So they need to go from English 1 or basic, right? They need to pass the course in order to go to the next one. What we do, it's usually as a final examination, right? A final exam. That's what we usually do, a final exam. So we have different types of assessment tools, but in the end, we give a final exam to our students. If they cover the minimum passing grade, in a scale of 100, our minimum passing grade is 70. Yes. So 70. If they, yes, if they cover the 70% out of 100%, they can go on to the next level. If they don't, then they need to repeat the course. Okay. So in your case, when you want to know if students are ready for the next English level, what kind of assessment tool do you use in your class? Is it only an exam? We usually give like a written exam, and I should edit this, okay? Because we give a written and an oral exam. That's what we usually use, all right? A written and an oral final exam. So do you have like a similar situation in Indonesia? Like, do you provide a final exam for your students? Like, in our case, the written and final exam is not 100%. Like, we give different examinations throughout the semester, and then the written and oral final exam, like sometimes it's 40%, sometimes it's 50%, right? And so obviously we add up all of the grades, and it needs to get to 70 as the minimum passing score. So do you provide exams for the English courses? Yes.
Yes, written and quiz, and then final exam can be oral or written also.
Okay. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So, Gandy, I want to ask you, Gandy. So
yes.
you teach in ESP, English as specific purposes, right?
Not really. What we do, it's more of content integrated language learning. Okay. So all of our courses in the program, because we basically train future English teachers and future translators or interpreters. So like everybody takes all of the courses, and then when they graduate, well, they decide whether they want to be teachers or they want to be, interpreters or translators. The city where I live, it's the coast of Mexico, by the Gulf Coast. So there are a lot of oil rigs and oil companies. So there is work for translators and for interpreters. They need to go to the oil rig, and do a different interpretation. So depending on the kind of job that they get, it's what they specialize, right? But they need to know about teaching, and they need to know about translation. So all of our most of our courses, either about language teaching, about translation, about interpreting, about culture, about research, all of them are taught in English. Yes.
I see.
At the beginning, in the first and second semester, they take classes, from different departments, and of course they are taught in Spanish, right? But once they go to the third semester to the 8th semester, most of the courses are in English. Like this one, for example, evaluation of learning, methodology, culture, methodology of English language teaching, research, introduction to research, etc. Yes, so that's how we do it in our program. And we have students that start from zero English, right? Ideally, they should know something, right? But there are some students that the only background in English is what they have learned at school, which is not much, unfortunately, right? The system and the public system, the education in English is not optimal, let's say, right? So when they get to university, students have problems understanding English, but there are some very good students that even when they start, they have zero English, and they get to a very good proficiency level at the end. So, and that depends on attitude, right? Something that you mentioned, that it's very important. When students have a very positive attitude and they are very driven, they basically get what they want, right? Their goal, and that is to get a very good level of proficiency. So let's get to the next teaching scenario, okay? So what would you do in this one? You have explained the basics of academic writing, such as punctuation and paragraph format. How would you evaluate this part? Academic writing, yes, because academic writing is very important, right, to express our ideas, and sometimes it's a little bit neglected. So we focus too much on grammar, on vocabulary, on speaking, pronunciation, and somehow we leave writing aside. But it needs to be evaluated as well, right? And not only evaluating students' skills to write something, but specific aspects of writing, such as punctuation, right? Because we know that a comma, a period, can make a difference in an idea. And that also, if we don't have a sequence in our ideas, the the message that we want to express might not get across, and then we might have problems, right? Problems understanding an email, problems understanding a task, etc. So what I like to do for this one is paragraph writing. That's what I usually like to do to evaluate, right? And usually as a kind of diagnostic test, right? And so at the beginning of the course, for example, I want to know how they're writing, the proficiency in writing. So I ask them to write a simple paragraph about any topic, or sometimes I assign a topic, and then I can see what aspects are they missing. And what I usually see is that they have problems with punctuation, right? They have problems with organization of ideas. And in that way, I can plan activities to tackle those problems, right? So that's what I basically do. So if we go to the next one. So we have, after discussing the topic of intercultural communication, you want to know if the students have understood the concept, right? What kind of evaluation tool would you use here? Okay, remember, if you still want to, you can click on the positive, right? And okay, so you want to know if they have understood. So for this one, I would usually do some pair work. Right? Probably with a guideline as well. So I could use a guideline, like with some questions, some specific questions that they need to discuss with a partner to see if they have understood the concept of intercultural communication, right? So I would be looking for certain keywords that tell me that they have grasped the concept and that they know how to use it, and that they understand the importance of being tolerant or being respectful to other cultures and different ideas from our own, right? I like, this is one of my favorite topics in the classroom, because when I start discussing about intercultural communication and the differences, right, that we have, that we communicate using English, but my culture, your culture, and other cultures are a little bit different, right? And sometimes people get stereotypes, and when we have stereotypes in our mind, in our head, that prevents us to communicate and to understand the other person, even if both people are proficient in English. So that's why this is one of my favorite topics, specifically in the English class, because in my experience, talking to other teachers, you know, Mexican teachers, teachers of a university, and even some other teachers around the world, sometimes the focus is too much on linguistic skills, right? Speaking, reading, writing, and sometimes we omit talking about the importance of being of having an open mind to understand other concepts and other cultures. And I think this is the reason of internationalization, right? And the reason of many universities are having this type of programs, inviting some other scholars, right? Maybe having some exchange with some other students from some other countries. And this is one of the reasons I also enjoy, whenever it's possible, to have this kind of virtual exchange with students from different countries, so that they see that it's not only English, right, what they need to care about, but also these having an open mind about how people in other cultures live and express themselves. So The next scenario, okay, so we have students usually memorize, and I would like to hear your opinion here, because this is what usually happens in my classes. When we ask students to present a topic, because you want to know whether they have understood the topic and they need to explain it, what they do sometimes is that they write it and they memorize the lines. So if students memorize their content lines and you want to evaluate comprehension and also speaking, what other tools would you use to assess students? You want to really evaluate whether they are, if they can speak spontaneously about a topic, if they have understood the topic. What would you use in this case?
Yeah, okay. So I prefer asking them to summarize the content of the text by putting the summary in the form of story map. After putting the summary in the form of story map, then they explain the story map one by one, so that they will not depend on the text. They will not, what is it called? Tell the content of the text as it is, as written in the original text. Okay, that's the way to minimize memorizing the content lines. Thank you.
All right, yes, thank you. Yes, and we all do different kinds of strategies, right? To evaluate and to prevent students from memorizing their lines. And at the beginning, yes, I would say with at the beginning stages, it's okay if they memorize. We know memorization is also a technique that gives the students, I think, the confidence sometimes they need at first. But as they move on, they need to know that they cannot keep memorizing lines, right? They need to be more spontaneous. So in this case, what I like to use, a technique that I like to use is role play. Right? Do you like role play?
Yeah, right.
Yes. Right. So so role play, and so they are assigned a role and they need to present in class, but they are reading the role right there. So maybe they have read about the topic before the class, or in the class, I give them the role that they need to play. So they need to be ready with the information beforehand. They need to read before in order to perform the role in the class. And usually the first time that students do this, they are surprised how much they can express without actually, reading something. And they start gaining confidence, which is in the end what we want. We want our students to get the confidence they need so that they can express themselves, right?
Mhm.
And finally, we have passive voice. I don't know for you, but for many of us Mexicans, this is a very complex topic, right? Passive voice. And so passive voice has been covered for a week. And if you want to know if they need more practice. In this case, I most of the time give a quiz. What do you think? Would you agree with me, or do you use any other tool?
I do agree. Quiz. Yeah.
Quiz. Yes.
What kind of quiz?
So, how many times should we provide quiz to students, Gandy?
Yes. Okay. So I think I hear what type of quiz. Yes, one of the first type of quizzes that I give is about verbs. Yes, because specifically verbs that have a different pattern, right? So we have regular and irregular verbs. So regular verbs are somehow easy, right? Because we just add be or ed And about the irregular verbs, right, sometimes are a little bit of a problem. So in order for them to know, to start with passive voice, one of the first quizzes I give, actually even before covering passive voice, is about the structure of irregular verbs, right? That would be like a kind of diagnostic test, because if they don't know the verbs, they cannot use them later, right? So it's like kind of diagnostic test. So that's what I usually do first. Then I cover the content, right? Obviously, we explain what is active voice, what is passive voice. And as you know, what passive voice is it's divided. And we start with the simple structures like present, right? And then we can move on to the other structures like past tense or future tense. So I would say I quiz periodically. So if I teach and present only, right? Present and passive voice, active passive voice, then after a while, when I consider after giving some practice, some exercises, and I would say like, depending on how many hours, right, you have your class, because sometimes it's 1 hour class, 2 hour class, maybe 4 hours a week. So, but passive voices takes time. So probably after a week, right, after 4 or 5 hours of teaching, I would provide a quiz to see if they are understanding the topic. Depending on the results on the quiz, then I would decide to do another quiz, right? And because that helps us, I believe, to know what is going on. There are always certain structures that pose more problem, right? Depending on your language. So, and that's how we teachers, right, we share the same language background. We can relate to that because we have been in that path, right? We had the same problems. So we can relate to that and we can help our students. So I would say that with some grammar topics that are difficult for students, I would quiz regularly, yes, until I see that they have managed to grasp the grammar point. Yes. Okay.
Sometimes students make me upside down because of limitation of memorizing past participle in passive voice, Gandy.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, but past participle, is it a problem for you? Yes.
Yeah, students. I should encourage students to memorize past participle in using passive voice.
Yes, definitely. And although sometimes, right, memorization is seen as part of the old paradigm, right, traditional teaching, we need to use memorization. We need to learn verbs. We need to learn vocabulary. We need to learn the structure. There's no other way, right? Because if you don't learn the verbs, how can you write a sentence, right? And it's true. We can communicate with mistakes using the past participle verb, and people can understand this. So maybe if you say something like I have, instead of saying I have written a book, if you say I have write a book, maybe people can understand you. But if we want to become teachers, right, if we're going to be somehow experts, right, in the language, well, we need to do our best. We're not going to be perfect, but we need to do our best to learn the verbs and to speak as correctly as possible, right? I believe. Do you agree with that?
Well, I have a question, Gandy.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm teaching writing for a very basic class, and sometimes I got trapped. I mean, instead of teaching writing, I am busy with students' grammar. So what do you think?
Yes,
Yes.
that's a very common a common way, because somehow we cannot separate them, right? Like grammar and writing. And what I would say, we need to keep in mind the learning objective. What do we really want? Do we want to emphasize accuracy, or do we want to emphasize fluency, just like we do in speaking? And I think we need to have a balance, right? We need to have both, definitely, in the classroom. And what we want is our students to start writing, I would say to leave aside grammar for a while. It doesn't matter if they make mistakes unless it impedes understanding completely, right?
Even with illogical sentences sometimes.
If it's fluency, yes. But you can write down, and you know what helps me with this is the dialogue journals. I will write it here. It's not about passive. I'll go back with the writing. Where it was this one here. I would say dialogue. Have you used dialogue journals?
Such as?
Dialogue journals. Can you see it?
Not yet.
Dialogue journal, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're not familiar with this one? No? Okay, I'll explain to you. A dialogue journal is basically a journal that goes student-teacher. Okay? So it's usually free. They write about whatever they want. Okay? Whatever they want to share with you. You ask the students, okay, you're going to, it's like a diary. Yes? And you ask your students to write about any topic. Of course, you just make sure and you tell them that things that they can share with you, that is not too private, that it's not about problems that you cannot solve. We need to be very careful with that. And that if they need help in any situation, that they need to go to the right person, right? Because we're only the English teacher. So why? To avoid that students sometimes maybe share like family problems, problems about economy, problems, you know, personal problems, right? So when I have done this, what students write is just some simple things like, okay, today I don't feel like getting up, right? And I went to bed last night late because I had a lot of homework and I was studying and I had an early class, so I didn't feel like going to my class because I was too tired, I couldn't pay attention, and so on, right? And of course, there are mistakes, yes? But the focus is not on correcting the mistakes. The focus is on getting students to let their ideas flow. So you don't correct mistakes. What you can do is to write down the mistakes in your notebook, to take notes of those mistakes. What kind of mistakes are students making? Is it punctuation? Is it organization of ideas? Is it grammar? Is it incorrect use of vocabulary, right? Yes, capitalization, for example, capital letters that are not in the right place. You take notes, but you don't write anything about that. You don't correct in the journal. What you do is you just write a note to the content that they share with you. So if they share with you something about, I didn't want to get up early today because I went to bed last night. I went late to last night because I was studying. You can write a note like, dear Mariam, for example, right? Dear Mariam, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that you had to go to bed late. You must be very tired. I hope that you can get some rest and you can get some energy for the following day. That's it, right? You can actually take some of the mistakes that they make, the structure, and you write it correctly, but with another message. Yes, but this is just to get students to write. Okay, not to correct grammar. Yes, and you can correct grammar later, of course. Yes, in a different situation. But if you're having problems with your students to write, the first step is to make them write. Once that you get them to write, then you can start maybe correcting not too many mistakes, because then students get frustrated, right? When they see like all marks, it's like, oh no, like present simple mistake here and capital letter, and this idea should go here and the other one. And they're like, oh, they don't want to write anymore, right? So if your objective is to get them to write, as you said that you're doing academic writing, you can try this. Let's see if it works for you, right? And you can always go to grammar later at another point. Yes?
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you for your question. Okay. So
Any more questions, Bu Yunatri? Bu Yunatri, any more questions?
Actually, there are so many questions in my mind.
So they
I
are
know.
journals like teachers' feedback, right?
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I enjoy this. I enjoy it. I enjoy reading
Your
students' comments. You learn a lot from your students this way, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you get writings that talk about how they feel about the English class and their English progress. And I think that's very good, because that helps us to see what we're doing right, but what we are doing wrong as well. I have read, right, in journals, students saying like, oh, they usually call us teacher. I don't know if they call you teacher or miss or mister, but usually they say teacher. I'm sad. I feel like I don't have any progress in my English. I keep making mistakes, and my friends are better, and I study, and I don't have any improvement, right? So, and that's why I said that it's just like one way to connect with your students, right? And to motivate them somehow that it's part of the process to make mistakes. And the problem is that if we focus too much on the mistakes, then they get frustrated. That's the problem when we overcorrect grammar. Yes.
Okay. So the next question. Well,
yes.
While teaching writing, do you start from the grammar points, let's say grammar base? For example, today you are teaching simple present tense, and then you ask your students to write a paragraph, maybe about their daily activity, or you start from daily activity first, and then you teach the grammar. Which one come first?
Yes, if you want to know what they know and how that would you ask them to write first, okay? But that would be only as diagnostic. You ask them to write, and you collect, right, their papers, and then you see, okay, whether they know or not, and then you might want to emphasize the mistake that they're making. One of the most common mistakes for Mexicans is the third person singular, right?
I see.
And there are always mistakes with this, right? I would say something like she tried instead of she tries.
Students.
Yeah, and so then you can focus more on that. You teach the whole thing because we need to teach it, and but you emphasize the parts that cause more problems for your students, all right? Because what I have seen, sometimes we focus too much on explaining everything, and they already knew. Okay, and you feel good because, oh, they're not making mistakes. But the reality is that they knew that topic before. Maybe they have studied it, many times before they got to your class. So in order for you to know whether they are actually learning, and if you can evaluate whether they know or they don't know, is to ask them to do it first, but not to assign a grade, just for diagnostic. Yes. Okay, so let me stop sharing this so that we can continue with the presentation. Where is my presentation? Okay, let's go back. Okay. So then let's go back a little bit to remember what are some of those characteristics of formative assessment. Yes. I like to think that in life there are always advantages and disadvantages. Right. So some of the advantages for formative assessment is that students can get immediate feedback, right? If you're doing this in the classroom and you are taking notes of what students are doing and how you can help them, you can tell the student right away. Yes, they don't need to wait like for you to grade and to come back the following class, maybe after 1 day or 2 days, to know what they have done right or what they have done wrong, right? So if we do this type of, we use this type of tools in the classroom, you can express immediately to the student. For example, the role play that I mentioned, right? You give a role, you're taking notes, and before the class ends, you can share with your students some of the feedback that you wrote, okay? You have done this correctly, yes, and you need to improve all of these other aspects. So that's one of the advantages of formative assessment. And of course, the monitoring. I think this is very important, the monitoring. You are there, you diagnose, and that's why I like to, yes, I usually ask my students the first day of class to write down something, to present something, because I want to diagnose their speaking skills, their writing skills. I play a listening exercise. I ask them to report on what they have listened. So I know if their listening comprehension is okay. I ask them to read something. I ask them to summarize, as you mentioned, or I ask them to present what they have read, and I take notes about what I see, right? And of course, the point is also to help a little bit more to those students that need more support, right? And another characteristic and advantage of formative assessment is motivation. Students feel motivated when they are provided feedback right away, but also when they are provided with opportunities to demonstrate their language skills. If I go back a little bit to the dialogue journal, and you emphasize on, you know, students basically putting all of these ideas in a blank piece of paper instead of grammar or vocabulary, students start seeing that they can write a little bit more each day. Maybe at the beginning they will write 1 sentence, and that is fine, right? But maybe the next time they will write 2. And this happens. And then they will see they write a paragraph, and then they are writing 1 page, right? So they see that their writing skills improve, and they feel motivated. And of course, we are always there to provide different types of tools so that they feel eager to continue with their own preparation. And I would say also a very important characteristic and advantage of formative assessment is this reduction of anxiety. Somehow tests makes us anxious, right? If you know that you're going to have a test, you're studying, right? And you go to bed late because you want to learn everything, and you don't want to make mistakes. You don't want to see that X, right, that cross in your paper, and that becomes very anxious. Here I will tell you a story about one relative that he always got very low marks, right, in his exams. And his mom would say, but why do you get, you know, such a low mark in you know, in your courses? I know that you study. I see you, right? I see that you're studying every day. You go to bed late. You take notes. You do your cards. You do everything. And then what happens? Why in the exam you always get a low score? And he would say, he would finally reveal his secret, and he would say, when I'm taking my exam, I get very, very nervous. And when I see that one person stands up and delivers the exam, I start getting very, very anxious. And then I cannot focus in the exam anymore. I'm just seeing who has finished. And if I see that people start, you know, giving the test to the teacher, I somehow feel that I need to finish. So I just answer quickly and I deliver the test. So he became very anxious about taking exams, right? So there are many students like this. Of course, it is something that they need to manage, right? We're not responsible as teachers, but it's something that it's personal. But somehow having different types of evaluation in the classroom gives the student like the confidence that they can, even if they get nervous in the exam is not 100%. They have a chance to demonstrate their linguistic skills using some other types of assessment, right? And there are some disadvantages, of course. Yes, it is time consuming for teachers. It is. So in the case of the dialogue journal, it's great, of course, but yes, it does take time. And because you need to read all of the journals, right? And you need to write down a message to all of the journals. And how many students do you have in your classroom, right? Like in our case, sometimes we have 40, sometimes we have 30, sometimes we have 10, but you never know. So, so yes, it is time consuming for teachers. It's a very good tool, but it can be a disadvantage in that sense. And another disadvantage for some students is that they may consider this type of evaluation unfair. Why? Because sometimes they do very good in their exams, but they don't do very good in other evaluation forms. And they believe, so if they do good in the exam, that's the score that they should have. But as we mentioned before, what formative assessment does also is that collaborative attitude of the learner, right? So we also assess that part, and you cannot assess that in an exam because it's more individualistic, right? So I like this picture here because we have like I can do it, right? And then like we cut the teeth, it's like, yes, I can, right? Yes, I can. So, and that's a change, a shift of attitude. And of course, we all get frustrated at a certain point, right? And we need to get motivated ourselves. And of course, as teachers, we also need to help our students to get that motivation that they need. Yes. And then basically summative assessment. Yes. Of course, there are also advantages and disadvantages. So when I refer to summative assessment here, remember some of those tools that we have seen, journals, presentations, role plays, quizzes, they can be used as formative or summative assessment. Usually a summative assessment, we assign a grade, and that's why it's called summative, right? The advantage is that it's fast, right? Because you sit all of your students, then you assign the quiz or the exam, and that's it. You just wait for them to finish, right? You're just like, okay, you have 1 hour or 2 hours to complete the test, right? And it's, you can grade it easily, right? You have an answer key, and then it's just like right, wrong, right, wrong. Of course, depending on the type of exam, if it's a multiple choice test, it's easy. If you provide open-ended questions, then it's a little bit more difficult as well, and it takes time, right? Also in a test, specifically in a test, the students show whether they have understood the concepts, right? So you can see, you can provide concepts, and you can, in a question, you can ask the students whether it's right or wrong, right? And you can see if they have understood or not. And it's an opportunity to think critically, specifically an opportunity to think at that moment. Yes, because that's the only thing that you need to do. You have the exam and you need to think about what is in the exam, right? Now, what are some disadvantages? Well, there's no immediate feedback for students, right? In a paper-based exam, they need to wait. Usually, this also depends on how you do it in the classroom, but usually students take the exam, they answer it, you take it to your office, you grade it, and then you provide the results the following class, right? So there's no immediate feedback the same day. And this makes students anxious, right? At least here, my students, sometimes when we give exams, when they finish the exam and you leave the classroom, sometimes they walk behind you, right? And they say, teacher, can you grade my exam? Or teacher, how did I do? Can you tell me this and that, right? And if it's an oral exam, right, they want to know right away. Yes, because they feel the pressure to know whether they did it correctly or not. And I'm pretty sure you can relate to this feeling of, oh, this question, I knew the answer, but at the last minute I forgot, and I'm not sure whether I chose the right answer or not. So yes, there's no immediate feedback for them. So yes, this encourages these feelings of anxiety and frustration a little bit. And of course, the disadvantage is that their summative assessment relies mostly on grades and scores, right? Usually we give this type of evaluation to provide, right, a score. And as a result, as I mentioned, it increases the students' anxiety, right? They become anxious before the test because they know they have to study for the test. They are anxious during the test, and they might feel anxious after the test. So in the meantime, you know, while they get the result, they are anxious as well. So I consider this a disadvantage as well. Do you have any comments here?
Okay. Talking about student anxiety, yeah. Okay, sorry for you. Yeah, how to minimize the student anxiety so that, as you explained us just now, yeah, the students tend to be anxious before and after being assessed. And one more question regarding minimizing students' anxiety. I think it's also be a wise way to consider the implementation of what is it called? Differentiated assessment. So we assess our students based on the students' characteristics, so that students will not feel that it is an assessment, it is a burden for me. Okay, thank you.
Yes, a very good questions and comments. Yes, minimizing anxiety. I believe students are going to be anxious anyway, right? But yes, we somehow as teachers, we can minimize this anxiety depending on how we talk to our students and how the comments that we make about the exam itself, right? If we emphasize that the exam is a way to measure what we know, to monitor what we know, and that it's an opportunity to recognize those areas that we need to improve, I think that kinds of calms down a little bit that anxiety. But if we start telling our students, okay, if you failed the exam, it's because you haven't studied enough, and because you don't know, you know, reading or writing or grammar, etc. And we start emphasizing those points that an exam is a way to let them know whether they know or they don't know. We know somehow it is that way, but we don't need to, how can I say this? I don't like to use this word, but I would use it, like kind of demonize the exam, right? And because it's like we're saying that the exam is like everything, right? So whether you pass, if you don't pass the exam, it's like you don't know anything, and this is not true. An exam is just a way, it's just a tool, right, to know what they need to, where they need help. For us as teachers, we need to identify where they need help. If we only use the exam to provide a grade and then forget about it, and it's like, see, you don't know, you need to study more, students are going to become anxious. So we need to start explaining our students that an exam, it's just a tool for them to monitor their own learning and to identify their learning needs. I definitely believe this. I do have peers that talk like this about exams. You know, it's like, oh, you failed the exam, you should better change to administration, or you should better go to another field of study because you don't know English, right? So I think we need to be more human, right? And to think for a minute when we were students and when we made mistakes and when we didn't get the results in our exams, the results that we wanted, even if we studied, even if we did our greatest effort and somehow we couldn't understand something, right? So that's one way that I would say about minimizing anxiety. And another point that you mentioned about differentiated assessment, yes, definitely that minimizes anxiety, to have different tools in the classroom. And you made me remember something that I use in my lessons in assessment. Sometimes, not always, I give choices to my students, okay? So there's not only one assessment. There are 2 or 3 types of assessment, and they need to choose the one that they want. Yes, I give them the rubrics, I give them all of the details, and they need to decide whether they want, for example, the writing to be evaluated through a journal, if they want to be evaluated through an exam, a writing exam, or if they want to be evaluated through a summary, for example, right? And they choose. Yes. What in my experience, they usually choose the same type of evaluation. It's only like a couple of students that choose something different, right? But I think this way they feel like more confident that they're going to do a good job because they have chosen that type of evaluation. So this is something that I have done, and it helps to some students reduce the anxiety because they feel more confident about how they can do it. But sometimes we cannot give so many choices, right? Sometimes it depends also on the program itself. And sometimes even if I don't want to give an exam, the program says that I need to give an exam. So sometimes we can make choices, sometimes we can. So we also need to explain this to our students. Yes. Okay. All right, so let's see what comes next. So I will share a form here similar to the one that we had the previous session. I don't know if you remember. Okay, I will share it here. And this is just an opinion test on testing. Let me see if you can open it and if you can see it. And I will share it in a second. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Let me.
Good.
I'll share it here, but you need to go to the link so that you can answer. Okay, these are just a couple of questions about an article that I found and I thought it was very interesting. It's not so recent, and that's why I want to know what you think. So this is an article by Henry Putnam and Smith, right? And they mentioned 10 benefits of testing and their applications to educational practice. So I would like to know whether you agree or disagree or you're neutral about these benefits that they mentioned. There are 10. The first one is the testing effect. Retrieval aids. I think I made a mistake here. Retrieval aid, no, it's fine. Retrieval aids later retention, right? So meaning that the effect of the test is that we are able to remember more. Okay, we tend to get that information like for longer periods of time. Yes. Okay. So that's number one. To see if you agree, you don't, right? If you disagree, or you're neutral, you don't know. It's like I don't know if that is one of the testing effects. Like the testing effect is that I remember more. I remember more or not, you decide, okay? Then we have number two, right? Testing identifies gaps in knowledge, all right? So all of those holes that we have in there, like if whether we know something or we don't know something, right? Number three, testing causes students to learn more from the next study episode, all right? Because they study and they learn more about the next one. Number four, testing produces better organization of knowledge. So somehow testing again, we can organize our knowledge better. Five, testing improves transfer of knowledge to new contexts, right? So we test, we know how we did, right? And then we go to the next one and we transfer what we knew to the new context. Then we have testing can facilitate retrieval of material that was not tested. So somehow we see in the test, okay, this was not covered, so let's take it out, right? 7, testing improves metacognitive monitoring, right? So a more aware way of how we think and how we can monitor our own learning, right? So constant testing helps us to be aware of how we learn, for example. 8, testing prevents interference from prior material when learning new material. Right? This is very common. We usually say, if you haven't learned this, you cannot learn the new material. So do you believe that testing prevents that interference from prior material when learning new material? Number 9, testing provides feedback to instructors, what we were saying, right? So we test, we check, right? And we have some feedback here. Do you agree with that? And number 10, which I believe is very interesting, testing encourages students to actually study. Right? Right? Do you agree with that? So take your time.
I would agree.
You would agree? Yes,
I do agree.
How many people are there in the room? I only have 10 answers. It says 146 participants, but I think they're still not ready to answer. All right? Okay, so So let's start checking the answers here. And they keep moving, of course. Just keep answering, don't worry. So let's see. Very interesting. So we have the first one, right? The testing effect. Retrieval aids later retention, that we can remember information for longer periods of time when we are tested, right? So we have most people that have answered are neutral, right? So they are not so sure whether they agree or not here. In this specific point, I'm neutral as well. I believe that we can later recall information from tests, but specifically the ones where we make mistakes. I think sometimes when we make mistakes, we focus too much on those aspects, and we see like, oh, I remember once I made a mistake in this one, and we recall that part. All right, so yes, it might be different for some people, but these authors believe this is one of the advantages or the benefits of testing, right? It's not so, testing, the exam itself is not bad, all right? It has advantages. Then we have in number 2, okay, testing identifies gaps in knowledge, okay? Yes, I think we all agree, right? We can see what is the specific part in the exam that most students are having problems with. Number 3, testing causes students to learn more from the next study episode, okay? So most of you agree. Yes, I would agree as well, all right? 4, testing produces better organization of knowledge. So let's see about this one. Yeah, so most of you agree as well. I'm not so sure about this one, but I'm not so sure if testing provides better organization of knowledge, but it's pretty interesting, something to think about, right? And why would you agree? Let's see, from the 12 people that have answered agree, why do you agree here? Why do you believe that testing produces better organization of knowledge? Any volunteer to explain in this part?
Yeah, I agree with this point because while we are trying to memorize, while we are having tests, so we are trying to memorize some points, and then we make our own patterns on the idea. So that's why I agree with that point.
I see, yes, okay. Well, yes, actually, yes, because yes, some people write notes, right? When they take exams, so they're preparing for exams, they write cards, notes, they do mind maps, different types of strategies. So yes, definitely. Yes, I see your point because we organize that knowledge, right? And sometimes even if it's a history exam, for example, we also need to organize the events in a specific order. Yeah, good point, good point. Number 5, testing improves transfer of knowledge to new contexts. Okay, so I agree, most of you agree here. Number 6, testing can facilitate retrieval of material that was not tested. Okay, most of you agree, some of you are neutral, and there are 2 people that disagree. Okay, I would like to hear the people that disagree. Okay, why do you disagree that testing does not facilitate retrieval of material that was not tested? If you disagree, can you share why you disagree? They don't want to share.
Nobody admits.
No, nobody admits I was the one that disagreed. It's okay, it's fine. Yeah, yes, of course, there's no right answer here, right? This is just the opinion of some authors. And as we read, we can see that some other authors agree with them. I would agree with most of these benefits, right? Some others I would question, right? And that's why I want to ask why. But there's definitely no right answer. This is just based on opinion. So yes, you might say that it doesn't help. It doesn't facilitate whether you need to remove some material that was not tested, or yes, it actually facilitates your work depending on your own experience, probably, right? 7, testing improves metacognitive monitoring. Yes, most of you agree. Yes, so talking about what Unetri, right? Unetri mentioned about, yes, organizing, the ideas, memorizing things when we prepare for an exam. So we also become more aware about how we learn, yes, and about the strategies that we can use to organize knowledge, even for teaching techniques, for studying techniques, all right? So this can help with that. And that's very important. So number 8, testing prevents interference from prior material when learning new material. Okay, so we have 7 agree, 7 are neutral, and 1 person disagrees with this one. So I would say here that it helps, right? Testing helps to know what material, what kind of material, what kind of areas haven't been learned, and so that sometimes, as we were saying about passive voice, if the student hasn't understood the irregular verbs that have a different pattern from regular verbs, and they don't know, they haven't learned, and they don't actually understand active voice, then it's going to be a little bit difficult that they can get passive voice. It's not impossible, but it might be a little bit more difficult. Number 9, testing provides feedback to instructors. Okay, most of you agree on this one. Yes, and actually we are the first ones to know what are the needs of our students based on the answers that they get, right? And finally, number 10, testing encourages students to study, all right? And we have 13 agree, 1 neutral, and 1 disagree. This is very interesting, this number 10, because sometimes I hear teachers say, if students don't have tests, they don't study, right? And I'm a little bit uncertain here, but sometimes in my experience, it happens. Students tend not to study if they're not going to be tested, right? Because they believe that with some other assessment tools, they can cover something or they can pass something. And sometimes it's necessary to memorize and to study. Language is practice, yes, but we need to study the grammar structures. We need to study vocabulary. We need to study phrases. We need to study idiomatic expressions. We need to study about phonetics, right? To understand IPA, to try to manage a good pronunciation so that people can understand what we're saying, so that we don't make so many pronunciation mistakes, etc. So I agree with this one. Testing encourages students to study. Yes, if students know that they're going to have a test, they are very likely to study for the test because they want to pass. Yes. So very interesting opinions here. Very, very interesting opinions. We have 15 answers. Remember, you can keep answering the ones that haven't yet, right? But so thank you for your opinion here, right? So I definitely believe testing is necessary. Okay, I believe both testing and different type of assessment, like formative assessment, they are necessary in the classroom, right? So let me stop sharing this one and to go back to the presentation here. Okay, so just to clarify, the formative and summative assessment, I will provide some examples here. And example number one, and this is just to make sure that the difference between formative and summative assessment is clear enough. Okay, so usually an exam, it's an example of test, and it's an example of summative assessment. But that doesn't mean that it's always considered summative. So for example, in this case, I have a vocabulary test. If the vocabulary test is given at the end of its instruction to check if the students, if the students have learned, okay, if the students have learned the content and decide whether they need more practice to modify the instruction, then you're doing formative assessment. Okay? It's at the end of the instruction, at the end of a period, but you're just doing it to check if they have understood, if they need more practice, and if you need to do something else in the classroom. Then it's formative. Now, if you do the same, you do the vocabulary test, it's also given at the end of instruction to check if the students have learned the content, but only with the purpose to decide if the learner knows or does not know the content, and to assign a grade, then it's a summative assessment. Yes, that's the difference. It's the same assessment, but it depends on the objective, whether it's going to be formative or it's going to be summative. Yes, I'll give you another example. So in the case of the dialogue journal, right? If the dialogue journal is revised and graded at the end of the term with the purpose to assign a grade on the use of written language skills, then it becomes summative. Because you're assigning a grade, you are checking something, right? But if the dialogue journal, okay, if the dialogue journal is revised to analyze the type of writing mistakes students make and decide the suitable writing activities, okay, to address those writing aspects in the classroom, then it becomes formative. Yeah, and it happens the same with an exam, with the quizzes. If you give the quiz in your class to check if the students have understood and if they need more practice, then it's formative. But if you give the quiz only to check if they have understood and to assign a grade, then it becomes summative. Yes? Any question here? Let's go back a little bit. Yes? So it actually depends on how you use the assessment tool. Yes, that's what it depends on. We need to decide if it's with the objective to monitor, to make changes in our class, in our lesson for the benefit of our students, to emphasize a certain learning point that hasn't been clear enough for them, then we're doing formative assessment. If it's with the purpose to assign grades at certain periods of time, right, it becomes summative. Of course, you can, even if you assign a grade, you can always use it to make changes in the classroom, right? It's not like you need to, okay, if I'm assigning a grade, I need to forget about the needs of my students. No. What I mean here is that, remember, both are important. We need to assign a grade. We cannot forget about that part, right? Because we need to decide whether a student is ready or not ready for the next content or for the next level, okay? So, yes, Elisa? Is there a question? I saw a hand.
Hello, Gandy.
Mm-hmm.
Gandy,
Yes.
your slide about formative assessment characteristics. In this vantage, this disadvantage, you write, yeah, may be considered unfair for some students. Can you give explanation more detail about it? Because sometimes I myself usually formative assessment in form of informal and formal assessment.
Yes. It may be considered unfair because some students, how can I say, sometimes if you, as it is a little bit more subjective, right? And sometimes the students that consider themselves that have a higher level of English and they get a lower score, they believe that they deserve better, right? And in formative assessment, we evaluate aspects of the language, of course, but we also evaluate this part of, you mentioned at the beginning, of attitude and collaborative work, all right? And sometimes, right, for example, in a dialogue journal, some students believe that because they write a lot, when you're going to assess it, right? Because they write a lot, they're going to get a better grade than the ones that write less. But in your dialogue journal, one of the aspects that you're going to evaluate, for example, is the use of grammar, the use of new vocabulary, maybe, the new vocabulary, the new structures, and the student writes a lot, but does not fulfill those aspects, he or she is going to get a lower score because it's not fulfilling using the new aspects of grammar or the new aspects of vocabulary. And if a student that maybe writes less, but is using grammar, new grammar structures, new vocabulary, well, of course, that student is making more effort because those are new structures. And the other student is writing a lot, but is using the same structures, no use of new vocabulary. So in that sense, that's why sometimes the students feel like, but it's not fair because I wrote more. Yes, you wrote more, but you didn't fulfill the characteristics of the task of the evaluation. I don't know if I made myself clear here.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so
So
yes, go on.
so formative assessment is assessment for learning, right? And
Yes.
assessment as learning also.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, there are some differences in there, how the theory now uses the terms, right? Like assessment for learning and as learning, right? Because it's a process.
And of learning.
Yes. That's
Assessment
right.
of learning is summative assessment.
That's right.
Go on, Gandy.
Yeah. And
Go on.
so that's why I always mention, yes, it's very important that we have different types of assessment in the classroom. It's very important. Not only a test, a writing test, for example, but also a summary and also a journal, right? To have a variety of assessments there. So I'm going to share some of the rubrics that I have used in my classes in different types of lessons. And so I will stop sharing here. Just give me a second, please. Okay. Let me just make it a little bit bigger so that you can see it. Okay. For example, I have used this one. It's an observation report here. And I like to do this type of evaluation because I use it to evaluate the task, but I also provide it to my students so that they know what they need to cover, right? I provide this to my students and I use it to score it. And I provide usually like a self-evaluation, right? They use it to self-evaluate themselves. So it's just like more of a guide, right? But I use it to evaluate as well. So usually I just give like a point here, like if it covers or it doesn't cover, so that it's easier, because sometimes when you have too many students, right? So like it's easy for me, just like, oh, they cover this point, and then I just do the math, right, to the corresponding percentage of the task. But let's see, I include simple aspects, right, to more elaborated aspects of the task, because sometimes the students forget this. So like if they have written their name on the first page, because sometimes they forget to write down their names, right? So if they have included the details of the class, in this case it's an observation report. This is for teaching students, right? It was for a methodology class. So if they include the level of proficiency, the type of school, for example, if the report describes the dynamics of the classroom, if the content report mentions questions or comments about the teacher's choice of activities, the writing itself, right? If the information is properly organized into paragraphs, if it follows the patterns of academic writing, if they are logically connected, if there are no major grammar mistakes that impede understanding, if it's free of typos or careless writing, because sometimes they do it at the last minute, right? So I want to make sure that they know that this is an academic assignment and that they need to be formal with that, right? I have used academic writing in my report. For example, no contractions, no vague words, no informal language. And then if they have used some specifics, right, for the layout, like the font, the spacing, and the amount of words that they are required, right, to write. This is just an example. This is an observation report. So it's a little bit of content, what they need to include, but also about writing. So somehow, as it's content integrated language learning, we teach about methodology, but we are teaching also English, right? How? Like this, because they need to write, because they need to talk because they need to explain. So I'm always checking content, but I always check in English as well. This is one. So let me find another. Yes.
Self-assessment, right, Gandy? This is
Yes. It's self-assessment, and I also use it. Yes, I provide it to them, and they need to check what they need, and I use the same rubric for me to score, to provide a score. Yes.
Gandy, there is a question.
Yes. Yes. Let me see. Okay, we have, let me read the question. Okay. As a student, I often see situations in class where many students did not respond to their lecturer, okay? When the lecturer has finished explaining and asking the students, are there any questions? So what do you usually do if your students did not give responding to you, or you also do not know if they understand or not? Yes, very good question. This always happens, right? I think. And one way to know whether they are understanding or not, because usually it is silent. Sometimes they don't, sometimes they feel that other students might laugh at their questions, or that the question might be out of place, that maybe everybody understood and it was only me, the one that didn't understand. There are many reasons, right? So when it's constant, okay, when I ask and the students usually say, no, there's no questions, I ask students, okay, I pick some students to explain. Yes. If we ask, are there any questions? They usually say no. Right? Everything is okay. Everything is clear. But if you say, okay, so let's see, Nadia, okay, Nadia, can you explain, please, okay, what we covered today in class? Then, well, Nadia might feel a little bit like, okay, I need to speak, right? And so that's one of my strategies. Another strategy is writing, okay? If they don't want to speak at that moment, okay, write down in a piece of paper what we covered in class today, what you understood of this concept and this concept, or if it's a grammar point, okay, if it's passive voice, okay, write down 5 sentences in passive voice, and I collect them. And in that way, I see if they have understood the topic. But it's very important that the student herself tries to speak, right? We always tell students to speak, right? But it's very hard when they don't have the confidence. So it's a step by step, right? Remember, do not worry if you make mistakes. The first step is to speak. So, but yes, there are many different strategies that we can use. I don't know if I have time to share another one. Let me know. Shall I? Or not? Shall I share another one? Let me see.
Yes.
Okay, I will share one more before we finish today.
Sure.
So these are not specifically, it moved up. What happened here? Okay, so this is not specifically about English. Okay, this is not about English, but I use similar rubrics or guidelines for English. I usually give this to my students. I believe when they know what is going to be evaluated, they feel like safer or more confident or more relaxed about what is going to be evaluated. So in order to avoid that anxiety, like I'm going to, okay, write a paragraph about this, but they don't know what is going to be evaluated. When you tell them, I'm going to evaluate punctuation, I'm going to evaluate use of new vocabulary, I'm going to use use of capital letters, right? They know, and they need to pay attention to those details. So in this case, it's a checklist, okay? It's a checklist for a presentation, a research presentation, right? So as you can see here, the instruction is use the following guide to assign your score to students' oral presentation. This is like peer correction, right? Peer feedback. So one student presents and the other ones provide feedback. So read the statements and write a check in the corresponding box. Yes, something simple. Yes, no, or needs improvement based on the student's thesis oral delivery. This is for thesis, right? Because our students write a thesis to graduate. So for example, the presentation was clearly planned. Academic writing, a good structure, checking the time, all of those details, right? The presenter shows research knowledge during presentation, because this is what we are evaluating here, that the student knows about methodological procedures to present research, okay? The presenter acknowledges other authors when answering questions, right? So, because again, it's like, we need to do a literature review, right? So the student needs to know this. The presenter addresses each question clearly and based on methodology. The questions that the viewers or the audience ask, right? So that the presenter is able to deliver an answer. And 5, the presenter delivers his or her presentation with confidence, right, in the work presented. And as you can see, this is something simple, just checking yes, no, and then we have 5 to 4 points approved, because this is not about a grade, but it's about approving or not, right? And this is approved. 3 to 2 points approved, but with recommendations. And 1 to 0, not approved, right? So this is just one example about this. So I think I need to stop here, right? Because I don't want to extend the time. So I don't know if there are any questions or comments.
Hello, everyone. Is there any questions? Hello? All right, everyone. It seems that time flies. 2 hours is not enough, Gandy.
I know,
So
2 hours is not enough.
So we can conclude that teaching, assessing, and testing as 3 items cannot be separated, but
No,
they should be integrated. Right?
That's
Candy?
right. I will just share it here. You have the presentation, and of course you can share it with the students, right? But yes, evaluation is a must, right? It's important to know and to evaluate, to know individuals' progress. Everywhere, we are always evaluated, right? Language testing is an objective measure to evaluate. We have agreed today on many of the benefits of testing. So it's not like it's bad to test. No, it has a lot of benefits, right? And language assessment has been widely used to differ from testing and focus more on progress and modifying and monitoring learner needs, right? Formative assessment refers to the evaluation that is given throughout a course, right? So it's throughout the progress of the course. That's why we say assessment. Summative assessment refers to the evaluation that is usually given after the end of an academic term, an academic period, and it's usually associated with a score. But both formative and summative assessment are useful tools for the teacher right? And are useful tools to use in the classroom. They are not angry at each other, right? They are both useful. And definitely having different types of language evaluation helps the learner reduce the anxiety when taking tests and hopefully to be more motivated to keep learning in the classroom, right? And I would agree, like if tests and quizzing are regularly done in the language classroom, students tend to study, right? So we need to keep having those tools, both tests and formative assessment. Thank you very much for listening to me today.
All right, thank you, Gandy. Hopefully all of you are not satisfied, so you can keep in touch with Gandy using her email address. Okay, Gandy, please you send your email address.
I will in a second.
And Butarwia, do you have anything to say as the chief of international class program? For closing statement, maybe.
Yeah, okay, many thanks. Yeah, goes to Gandy. Okay, thanks very much for sharing meaningful performance, meaningful and beautiful performance. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. And I do hope that our cooperation will not end here. And next time, if we have another chance, we are happy to cooperate with you. Okay. And maybe Bu Saida will say something. Bu Saida as the head of department. Hello?
Bu Saida. Hello, Bu Saida.
Bu Saida is still busy, yeah, with the workshop.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Have splendid weekend with your family, Gandy.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be sharing the little thing that I know with you. And yes, I hope that we can, keep collaborating together, our universities, our students, and we are as peers. Thank you very much for this opportunity and have a very good weekend.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure, Gandy. Don't forget us. Yeah. We always welcome to my country, Indonesia, Gandy. Okay, all. Thank you for joining the participants. Thank you for joining this program. And hopefully we can again and again meet in virtual, or offline meeting next year maybe. Thank you, Gandy. See you again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gandy.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.